All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 411 Ground and Pound MMA podcast. We are your weekly look into the wide, wacky, wonderful world of mixed martial arts. My name is Robert Winfrey, and I'm your host. Thank you all very much for tuning in. We've got, you know how long this is. I'm here going off the cuff at the very start of the recording. We got some stuff to talk about. Last night, as I record this last night for you, at least a day or so ago, UFC 305. So we'll have a review of all that. Good, bad, and otherwise. And there was a little bit of all of it. A little bit of all of that. There is a mediocre to bad Apex card to preview. And we've got some news to talk about. So, yeah, we got a full plate ready for us on this particular episode. So if you could interact with the product a little bit, always appreciate. So like, comment, subscribe, star rating, written review, whatever's applicable to your podcast platform of choice. Then sharing, on your social media platform of choice or with people in your real life if you think they'd enjoy the product. So point them in our direction. Hopefully we can have a good time with it. All right. Anything else in my intro? No, I think that's it for the intro. Okay. Something occurs to me later, it'll occur to me later. All right, let's jump into this. We got stuff to talk about here. UFC 305 in the rearview mirror. First up, as usual, predictions. How did we do? Okay. Full disclosure, I changed two picks. One of which was the main event. I'll explain that in a second. The other one, I actually swapped my opinion on the Luana Santos and Casey O'Neill fight. Two reasons for that one. One, I hadn't, when I found out how short the replacement window was for Santos, she only had a month, so 3-ish weeks to get ready for this. That was an impactful part of it. Also, the news that Casey O'Neill had shifted her training from, I forget which group she was with in Vegas, but she left that gym and moved to the Fight Ready, which I believe is Henry Cejudo's camp in Arizona, which I think is probably going to be a better fit for her. So a couple of small things there just made me change my mind on that one. Wish I'd have changed my mind. Wish I'd have taken the opportunity to change my pick on Nickel and Aguilar after Aguilar missed weight, but I did not. Just on the off chance you think I'm like, no, you shifted a bunch of your stuff. No, again, there's some stuff that yes, but okay. The main event, I changed my pick from Adesanya to Dricus du Plessis. I didn't get the chance to do as much tape study as I wanted. I had stuff come up in life this last week and I don't get paid for this, so I have to prioritize. But I was back and forth on this all week, and this is the dumbest thing ever. I swear this is the dumbest thing ever. Because I know it doesn't matter. But the final bit of impetus to change my pick in the main event was Drake betting on Adesanya, which is unbearably stupid. I know I can hear you laughing at me practically. Because what that guy's betting habits are immaterial to anything. Do not matter at all. Any bit. But it's funnier to pick against him when he bets because he has a pretty bad track record. That said, I mean, this thing closed pretty much as a pick 'em. I think I don't know which, they might do DraftKings because there's sort of a sponsorship thing there with them in the UFC, but whatever website the UFC uses for their odds had this as a pick 'em at the time the fight started. Not the worst bet that Drake has ever made. He's made a few others that I kind of go, what were you thinking? So when he loses, I just laugh. And a few times he's bet pretty heavy on favorites who have been upset, but, again, his betting history, that was a meme for a long time. And I played into it for this, I'll be honest. I saw that he threw down the cash on Izzy and went, you know what? This is close enough for me to just change my pick here for the joke. Because, yeah, so I changed my pick, and that worked out. That worked out for me. So my analysis of that fight, though, I think was fairly accurate. We'll talk about it when we get into detail, but so those were my changes. Um, yeah, they again both wound up going my way, but even if they didn't, if you think I'm messing with this to just pad my numbers, all I want is to be positive by the end of this. So if I'd gone like, what would that be, 7-5 instead of 9-3, I'm still okay with that. But ultimately, 9-3. Got the co-main wrong. That was. I'll stand by the odds were a bit too far in favor of Urseg on that one. I think I might have said that last week. So that a little bit, but I wasn't looking for value, so to speak. I was looking for who I thought would win the fight. Urseg, I thought was, you know, I picked him for a reason. Sadly, didn't work out, but Gamrot and Hooker got that wrong, but I'm not going to split decision. Heck of a fight. I'm not going to complain about that one. Sometimes those happen. You can't get salty about those. And then I already referenced it, but Nickel and Aguilar, our first fight of the night. A lot of people picking Nickel for good reason. He showed some. That wasn't a long fight, but he showed some solid ability before Aguilar kind of caught him. So once again, 9-3 for that 12 fight set of cards. Brings me year to date to 236, 10, and 103. I'm still okay as long as I'm positive by the end. That's really all I want. The rest of it, how much I'm positive by, I don't care. This is largely just for my just to see how I do at this. So that's what, for those of you who might be newer, it's one of the things I'm doing this year. I've been doing this for a long time. This is the first year I've actually been tracking how my predictions go because I do the whole cards. So, all right, but on the fights in particular, so that's where we are on the prediction set. Main event: Dricus du Plessis defeats Israel Adesanya via submission. It's listed on Wiki as a face crank. It's a rear naked choke. For it to really just be a face crank, you need to be across the face. There's whoever is responsible for this won't give credit to a rear naked choke unless the arm is completely under the chin. And that's ridiculous. You can be choked across the lower jaw. So if it's just across the lower jaw, but that mechanism is still compressing and strangling by cutting off the blood flow, it's a choke. Technically, it's a strangle, but I don't feel like getting that pedantic about it. That's what it is. Face cranks, this did not really feel like a face crank. Sometimes they do, but this, I'm disagreeing with this one. That took place at 3:38 of round 4. So what did we get out of this? You know what? This was a pretty good fight. Uh, it it was fun. Um, I had Du Plessis going into the fourth. I had Du Plessis up 29-28. I gave him 1 and 2, and then Izzy took the third, which I think was how most people had it. You could have given the first to Izzy, for the record. First round was close enough to maybe go the other direction. But first round, Izzy just took a little bit to kind of feel things out. One of the things I was curious about was how DDP would deal with the leg kicks, because a lot of Adesanya's offensive game builds on that. He does a lot of low calf kicking, not even necessarily to hurt your calf. If it does, great. But it's disruption, and it's setup, and it's like reads for distance. And everybody's kind of got something they like doing for their range finding, for their this is what we do to settle myself into the fight. For Izzy, it's calf kicks. People who have been really successful against him to this point in his UFC run were able to neutralize the calf kick. Whether kicking with him, which is kind of what Pereira did in both of their MMA fights. Um, or Blachowicz just constantly checking them. And I mean, Blachowicz is like made of metal. So that dude's like, okay, I'll check it. We'll go shin on shin. That's going to hurt you more than me. And somehow it does. Who's the other one that had? Strickland. Strickland did a lot of checking, but less. Blachowicz was kind of inviting contact on the kicks he was checking. Strickland would do that, but he did a lot of like either pulling the leg back in retreating, so hollowing out the space, or raising the leg completely out of the way because is kicking low enough that you can just lift your leg up. And he would do a lot of like the high knee marching forward, which you see out of some Muay Thai fighters. And Strickland does that for a lot of reasons, but it neutralized a lot of that. So I was curious how DDP would do with this. He's not much of a checker as far as leg kicks go, which did in fact play out in this fight. He checked a couple, but not a lot. He did a really good job of mitigating those strikes in particular. He did get hit with a few of them, but a lot of it was distance. So one, he was willing to kick with Adesanya, which is a big way to kind of help neutralize some of his game. There's value to, even if you are the less effective jabber, jabbing with a guy who's jabbing your face off just because it breaks things up. So there's value to kicking with the guy who's kicking you, even if you are not as good at it as he is, or, she is for that matter. It just kind of messes with things. It was actually a way to kind of partially dissuade Jose Aldo from kicking you in the leg back in the day. Because he had nasty, nasty leg kicks. If you kicked with him about those, he wouldn't do it a whole lot. And some of this coincides with him dealing with some lower leg injuries and focusing more on his boxing in the later part of his career. But he would tear guys up, especially because they wouldn't kick back with him. There's this idea somewhere that if someone's better than you at a technique, don't engage them on those terms. And you don't want to go straight one for one with them as that being your only idea. But jabbing with a guy who's jabbing you can disrupt him, even if you're on the losing end of those exchanges. If it's disrupting what the other guy's doing, then it's valuable. If you can't kick as hard as Jose Aldo, but you still throw leg kicks with him, it could dissuade him from kicking your leg. And so there's some of that. So du Plessis being willing to kick with Adesanya, even though Adesanya is technically the better kicker. I don't know if he kicks harder, but certainly more aesthetically pleasing. I'm not here to rag on DDP, and as a guy who does not personally, I do not have the best looking kicks. I am not throwing stones from within my glass house. I'm just pointing it out that some of that might be self-consciousness on the part of a lot of guys. Someone is better at it. Someone looks better doing it. My kicks are ugly, but you don't need to have pretty kicks for them to be effective. Generally, they do. Generally, but not exclusively. I mean, Conor's leg kicks look like crap, but they work. At least when he was fighting. Alex Pereira's kicks, his leg kicks in particular, they don't look great. If you just watch them, they don't look great. They will mess your day up, though, man. Maybe even longer. Like, some stuff doesn't have to be pretty to work. You don't need to have an aesthetically pleasing jab for it to actually, accomplish things. It helps. Largely because when you perform the jab properly, it does sort of develop an aesthetic quality. But if the other guy's got a prettier jab than you, just jab with them, even if yours is ugly. If it's landing or dissuading them, keep doing it. So partially, DDP being willing to kick with Izzy affected some of his strategy, but a lot of the reason a lot of the ways he dealt with calf kicks were distance. The The first round, I think Izzy was not really in. He did well. I mean, I'm gonna talk a little bit about this because DDP's game is bizarre, and I don't fully understand it, and it's kind of compelling. Trying to figure out what's going on and how it works, because it works, but it's a whole other thing. I think Izzy was not prepared for the sheer distance that DDP could cover on his blitzes, and certainly the speed with which he could do it. Because he does that a fair bit, just will blitz forward. Similar to Robert Whittaker. Whittaker uses a lot of blitzes, but Whittaker bounces a lot more to kind of set those up, and Whittaker, for comparing Whittaker to DDP in particular, I don't mean this as a knock on Robert Whittaker. My respect for his career is fairly well documented. But Whittaker, when he blitzes, does tend to do one of like three, if that, combinations. It's not the, and I only say that because I've watched every Robert Whittaker fight in the UFC. That includes his when he won his season of the Ultimate Fighter at welterweight. Like I've covered that man's entire stint in this promotion. So over enough time with enough tape, patterns emerge on everybody. There's some there for him. He's successful despite it because some of his setups before he does it are a little bit different. There's a lot of ways to make combinations work, even if you're a touch repetitive with them. I mean, even just three different combinations cycled through can fry somebody's defensive brain, unless they're really, really well schooled. But DDP does not quite have the um, same number of programmed responses when he decides to blitz. It all kind of looks the same because there's a slightly awkward off-balance component to it. But if you actually watch what the punches are and where they're going, it's not quite as... It's always going to be, Superman punch into head kick or, double jab. Yeah. I mean, the famous one from Whittaker is the 1-2 head kick, right? Because it's a great combination. But he throws that a lot. Stephen Thompson has a really good blitz, but he also does the kind of karate blitz where it's step, punch with the opposite hand, step, punch with the opposite hand, angle off, high kick. I mean, he's talked about that on his YouTube channel a lot, or other people have when they've done stuff with him, so it's not like that's a secret. But you can see some of those patterns emerge, and DDP doesn't quite have the same patterns as other people. So I think that was a little bit awkward for Izzy. And again, because he looks so awkward, I don't think du Plessis gets the credit for his explosive ability to close distance. Because, again, some guys do it and they look really good. When you do it and you look awkward, people kind of clown it. And then but that allows you to surprise them because they think, oh, it looks silly. Therefore, it can't possibly work as well as it looks like it's working. So that, because he landed some pretty good punches on Adesanya in the first round. Adesanya did okay the first round. Some pretty decent jabs. But a lot of it was him just getting some reads. Stuff like that, which is not uncommon for him. Second round is when DDP goes a little bit to the wrestling, which ultimately plays in his favor. He gets Adesanya down. Adesanya good about getting up. And against the fence, Adesanya's takedown defense is pretty good. In open space, it's a little bit more iffy. So there were actually a few takedowns later that ugly as sin. Ugly as sin takedowns, but DDP hits them because Adesanya's a little bit surprised by them or something similar. I mean, at one point, DDP kind of falls forward. He missed a punch. Izzy starts moving away. And it's not like he gets hit and dropped. He just kind of... There were some slips on that canvas, both of those guys on occasion. Izzy played off a couple of times. He got hit and stumbled as, something's up with the canvas. And there was at least one of those that I think he was correct. There's a couple others. Yeah, you're trying to play that one off. Um, but DDP slips, and as he's like face planting, grabs the low single, which is an amateur wrestling technique. I think they call it like the John. I think they call it the John Smith because he kind of innovated it. If you want to see that particular technique done in competition a lot, very, very well, Cale Sanderson, who I think, is he still the coach at Penn State right now for the wrestling team? But undefeated during his NCAA career, Olympic gold medalist, from phenomenal wrestler. He had a really good low single, and if you can hit that, it's really good. It's a good takedown, and DDP just, despite being off balance and falling, saw an opportunity to try something, did it, and he kind of upended Izzy. He kind of stumbled backwards, which when you do that technique properly, they go back. um, you go down, you like cup the back of the ankle, make sure your arm is flat to the mat, put their shin against your shoulder, so you're real low, and then you drive forward holding the foot in place. It puts a lot of pressure right above the ankle into the shin bone, and you tip them backwards. That's also why you have to make sure your foot is like flush against the mat, because if you can turn your foot out there, you actually alleviate a lot of that pressure. But nuance of a random wrestling technique for the week, I guess. So he hits one of those. He gets the back because Izzy will give it. Again, some decent enough groundwork from Izzy in this one. Mitigating some damage. He gets hit when he's getting up because DDP is good about finding offense. Round 3 is where Izzy really starts coming alive. He's kind of got some reads going now. He's throwing some front kicks to the body, which good idea. DDP has a very high guard. It does leave the body open. I think it was the second round when Izzy started landing some body shots, but the third round he really was kind of committed to it. Anytime they'd step into the pocket, he'd just roast the ribs a couple of times. Those were getting to DDP by the end of this thing. I'm not sure he was like in danger of being stopped by them in any sort of like immediate capacity, but those were not pleasant. Izzy may not be the hardest body puncher in the world, because getting knockout, like punching power to the head and punching power to the body are actually a little bit different. Good damage to the head tends to come from accuracy. Not that there's no accuracy in body shots, but I'm going to make a point. But timing and precision are a lot more important with like knockout punches to the head. Got to get them like just in the right locations, one of the major knockout points, and then timed properly with what the other guy's doing. That's how you really get those done. Power punching to the body is a slightly different animal. There's guys who have been really good knockout artists to the head whose body work left a little bit to be desired. And vice versa. Some guys who are just horrendous body punchers, not necessarily possess a lot of knockouts with head shots. So you kind of pick your poison there. Izzy's were good. I don't mean to say that they weren't. They were very good. And I'm sure, I could take like 2 of those. One of those combinations, basically. Step in, boom, boom, and I would probably be dead. Like, I'm not pretending to be tough here. But his body work historically has not been... His body punches, specify that a little bit. His body kicks have been a little bit better. But this was kind of a newer wrinkle to his game. He's not much of a body puncher. Historically, at least, has not been. So added that here. Good read on how DDP keeps his guard. Lot of forward pressure from Izzy in that third round. Good defensive wrestling. Good clinch avoidance. Just a really good round. The tide was starting to turn there. By the time we got to the fourth round, Izzy, despite being down 2 rounds on 2 judges' scorecards, was actually pretty heavily favored. Like, you could see things starting to turn. The body shots were working. Um, Du Plessis looked like he was tired, but he always looks like he's tired. Izzy didn't look like he was tired, but pretty clearly was a little bit tired. When you look, Izzy has different tells, right? Um, some guys, when they get tired, look like you think someone who's tired looks. Some people don't, but there's other things they do that let you know, oh, there's stuff settling in now. Sometimes it's hand position. Guys who normally might carry their hands higher start carrying them lower. Punch mechanics can change, especially if you've done some heavy grappling. You may not look like you're breathing heavy, but if your shoulders aren't responding the way they should, some of that goes away. One of Izzy's big issues when he starts getting fatigued, which doesn't happen often, believe it or not, um, his defensive footwork starts to suffer a little bit, especially if he's on the back foot. Um, that's what kind of started to show up in the fourth round here, because he had a good first half of that first round, man. He really did. Um, Kind of picked up where he left off. His jab was starting to get going, still working the body well, but he starts losing a little bit of pressure. And something about the way these two match up, normally Izzy doesn't mind backing up and circling. He does a lot of counter fighting, so he's not opposed to being the one evading. Something about this fight, though, and the way these two matched up, anytime he was going backwards, Du Plessis' offensive style did not allow for him to do a lot of what he normally does. So he had to just get away from it. If there was a blitz, like, okay, he wouldn't plant and trade. Did a little bit, take a slight angle. He looked to earlier. But Du Plessis also just extends things. You might expect only 2 punches. Instead, he's going to throw 3. And then that third one means you either have to risk getting hit or completely avoid it and then completely reset. It's one of the major reasons Du Plessis, despite looking like a guy who, like, how are people not counterpunching this dude's head off? Well, one, he's very durable. Two, there's a rhythm to counterpunching. Now, don't get me wrong, this is not always true, but it's not impossible to throw with someone. If somebody's going to give DDP problems on the feet, I mean real problems, it's going to be someone who's willing to throw with him. That's where things might get dangerous for him. But if you're waiting for like the last shot to cleanly miss, you hit your angle and then you fire, which is how a lot of people do it, that kind of sequence, and it can be faster or slower, but that's the sequence of events. There's usually with Du Plessis another kind of blow coming. And that means, okay, I've evaded, I've set myself, I'm ready to fire, oh, something else is coming. I'm either going to throw with him, and that might go real bad. I'm going to block or slip again, but by that point he's moved, or I'm going to completely exit the exchange, and we're just going to reset. It doesn't actually provide a lot of opportunities for counter-striking. It's so weird because by all logic, some of his style should be counterable like that, but the willingness to extend and to disrupt the rhythm of the fight it's off-putting to a lot of people. And I think that bothered Izzy a little bit. But once he got kind of a better feel for it, and once some of the explosiveness of Du Plessis faded, which it does, it's very rare for someone, especially the size of these guys. You get like middleweight and above, you even get welterweight and above. Explosiveness fades over the course of a fight. It's a lot harder to wait that out at the lower weight classes, but you can wait out a guy who just tries to explode a lot at middleweight. He was feeling a little bit more confident. But Du Plessis was able to land on him, I think, more than a lot of people anticipated. A lot of Adesanya's defense is either footwork based or leaning. He does a lot of leaning, and that's not the end of the world. He's a tall guy, he's a long guy. If you have those attributes, understand the trade-offs, but it's a tool that you can deploy. Leaning, though, leaves you a bit more vulnerable if you've misjudged distance, or even if you've judged it properly, if there's something done to close distance that you either are slow to react to or don't anticipate, you're going to get tagged. And Adesanya got tagged in this fight a few different times. The last like minute or so before the end of the fight, DDP just again looks tired, pretty beat up to the body, even if he's not doubling over and like I'm about to be finished. Just he took some nasty body shots. Those were definitely not pleasant. He just starts like somewhere in his brain the switch flips from okay, we've done the backup thing. Now we go on offense. And he started pushing forward, and that man is nothing if not determined. He landed punches, he just kept throwing. Adesanya, this is where some of his footwork, well, you can see some of the issues starting to show up. He's just trying to get out of the way. He gets backed up to the fence a little bit too easily. People were clowning him for doing the, turning and running thing, and I get that you don't like to see it. It's not aesthetically pleasing, and I don't recommend that you do it all that often. Sometimes it's what you're supposed to do. Sometimes that's the correct answer if, cage is here, dude's coming in, I'm going to exit to one side or the other, and I'm just, rather than try and, just pivot and re-engage, I don't like the position, I'm going to move very quickly to reset. And it does not look good, but sometimes it's effective. So I'm not going to clown Adesanya for that. But elements of his defensive footwork, when he's under pressure and a little bit, fatigued, that starts to suffer. If he's dictated the pace of the fight, it's not a big deal. Look at some of his other fights that have gone the distance, and he will maintain the accuracy and the proficiency of the specifics of his movement. Times when he's been pressured, even Kelvin Gastelum, because that fight was fought at a high pace. You could see some of it in that fight. That was one of the, it hasn't come up a whole lot since, but it did there. It did a little bit in the Blachowicz fight. Not a whole lot, but a little bit. Of course, that was also Blachowicz just always reacting to every feint Adesanya threw at him, and Adesanya but he never reacted the same way twice. So Adesanya couldn't actually get a whole lot of read on a lot of what Blachowicz was doing. So yeah, that was playing in, but by the time we get towards the end, bit of a left hand from du Plessis, and then Izzy kind of stumbles to one knee. Another thing he kind of got clowned for. He gets back up, and then he kind of points to the ground. Now, people looked at that, and when he did the Max Holloway thing, then immediately, backed up, turned, and ran. He was indicating that he slept. I don't think he was doing the Max Holloway thing. That being said, not aimed at Israel Adesanya, the following. Not aimed at him. But as an aside, can we stop doing that, please? People, you are not Max Holloway. And you're not fighting Justin Gaethje. Don't do that. Muhammad Makayev tried to do it. Because Max did it and because it became such a thing. It was not the first time Max Holloway had done that. We're almost done. You want to go thing? He did that famously against Ricardo Lamas. He was winning that fight handily. Then we get to the end and Clapper goes off and he just points at the ground. Do you want to do it? And Lamas, sure. And they spend 10 seconds just throwing heat at each other. But Seriously, guys, you're not Max Holloway. Please don't. Just let that go. Let it alone. You're not Max. Max Holloway is one of a kind. They broke the mold when they made that man, and but so there's he points to the ground a little bit, and I think fairly confident. He's like, yeah, I slipped on that spot earlier, slipped there, trying to play off, I didn't get hit and hurt. I don't think he was badly hurt, but if there's another thing about this fight if there was one thing that kind of surprised me here, I had forgotten a little bit how good Izzy's poker face is when he gets hit. Because that guy doesn't sell anything. He ate a flush head kick from Kelvin Gastelum in the fourth round of that fight. And it badly hurt him. But it took everyone a second to realize it because he gets hit and he stops moving. I don't mean like goes unconscious. I mean, bam, sets his stance and just waits. Like, oh crap, I'm hurt. But you don't see it on his face. Nobody realized how much he was hurt until Gastelum adjusted, like moved around and then came back at him, and Izzy had to move. But the fact that he didn't do anything to sell it and moving would have sold it meant that he had a little bit of just not a lot of time, but a little bit extra to try and recover. And then he starts moving, and everyone realizes because you can tell he's a little bit hurt. Like, oh, he's hurt. Yeah, he doesn't sell, and bless him, that's a benefit. But because he's so good at both he's good about not being hit cleanly in general, and he's really good about not reacting in any sort of meaningful way after he gets hit. I think he got rattled a couple of times here. I may be very wrong, but uh, if there was something that kind of surprised me, there's a few different times when du Plessis is able to land. And I'm not surprised he was able to land, but I may have undersold his power in some of my analysis. He's not like a big one-punch guy. He's got some, but that guy has thudding power, and that's different than snappy power. He'll thud you, and I think there's a few different times when I think some of his reactions and considerations were a little bit, oh, okay, so that's what I might be dealing with. And, I mean, because he's one of the greats, he pushed through it, adjusted and whatnot, but I think that came into play a little bit. And I think that also kind of helped drain some of his physical reserves. Because he was reacting not the way you want to react, especially down the stretch in the fourth round. Again, he kind of gets blitzed again by du Plessis. Du Plessis gets the superior angle towards his back, and Izzy doesn't want to just plant and get run over, literally run over. So he starts moving, winds up giving his back. If there's another bad habit Izzy has, when he moves along the fence line, and this is especially true when he's along the fence line, he does not have his hands up. There's a lot of, you don't need him up all the time, okay? Be very clear about this. That man he is the second best middleweight the sport's ever seen. Has forgotten more about striking than I'll ever know. So when I say that, you don't always need your hands up, I'm not here saying like, oh, he didn't always have his hands in, that perfect position. Clearly he's no good. No, he's exceptional. Generational. Seriously. If there is one time, though, when sort of regardless of preferred style and how good you are in general, when you have to move one specific direction, and you can only move one way, when your back's against the fence, you have to go left or right. That's when you really need your hands up, because once you commit to going one direction, something is going to come at you if they're in range. Guaranteed. Something is coming at you if they're any good. And as we're talking about championship level in the UFC, something's coming at you. You need your hands up under those circumstances. That same kind of position is what got him in trouble against Pereira in their first MMA fight. A little bit gliding against the fence with his hands down, and Pereira cracked him. Gastelum found him on occasion under those conditions. Not a lot, but a little bit. Who's the other one? Honestly, Strickland. Because Strickland, did get the only knockdown on Izzy in his entire, certainly his MMA, his UFC career. Kind of in that was more like throwing with him in a deliberate exchange, but a lot of that position, you watch that fight, a lot of times Izzy just backing up and circling along the fence line. Look at his hand position. It's not the best. He's moving along the fence line here, and DDP's behind him and starts swinging right hands. Lands a couple, gets a body lock from the back, a rear waist lock or a tight waist or whatever you want to call it, which he'd gotten before, and sags into a mat return. Normally mat return's like elevated and slammed, but gets the body lock and he sags to his own right. Gets a bit of a hip in front of Izzy's knee so he can't just step out. Drags everything down to the mat, jumps to the back, spin. It's a really smart thing. He jumps to the back, gets one hook in, starts fighting for the choke. Izzy starts, trying to deal with that. Du Plessis had threatened to jump the back a lot in this fight. Had some back control in the second. This time, Izzy's a little bit slow to start building, so he doesn't really block the second hook going in, which means that as it goes in, Du Plessis is able to snatch him off of his base. So he's no longer based up on his hands and knees. He gets rolled, so they're flat on the mat, and that's a much worse position. Du Plessis gets the choke, forces the tap, and gets the win. And the reaction to this has been kind of funny. The number of people going, how? Like, I think the joke that a bunch of great joke material came out of this. Because people just like not getting it. Don't get me wrong, I do not pretend to have some deep insight into Du Plessis' game. I do not. But I know it works. And I'm going to go through and do some serious study on this guy because I need to know why this works. I really do. It's going to bug me for a while now. But somebody mentioned, like, okay, every Du Plessis fight goes like this. Step 1, swing. Step 2, miss. 3, gas out. 4, question marks. 5, victory. That's a little bit dismissive of his abilities. It really is, but people don't, because nobody really understands how his game, like, not just how his game works, but why it works. That's kind of the impression you're left with. Is there's clearly some good stuff going on there, but he always looks like he gets tired. And here's the thing about that. I'm not saying he doesn't get tired, because it's a fight. Of course, you're going to get tired. I don't think he gasses nearly as badly as his body language would lead you to believe. Whether that's intentional or not, I couldn't tell you. But he is never as tired as you think he is. And that's a big thing. If you think he's more tired than he is, your considerations change, your calculus changes, your decision-making changes. And it can go very badly for you if you think he's very tired and he's not as tired as you think he is. So he's never quite as tired as you think he is. He clearly has power. He's hurt a lot of guys striking. He's well-rounded. Like, that guy, he's got plenty of submissions. He's got stoppages. He can fight on the feet. If there's one place I haven't seen a lot of fighting from him, it's in the clinch. So I haven't seen prolonged clinch work from him. But he can fight on the feet. He can fight on the ground. He can do some stuff from bottom. Remember, he got taken down by Derek Brunson. I mean, at one point he pulled Darren Till on top of him basically into mount and then got out of it. Like, he's not helpless off of his back. His top game is good control, and he is good about finding damage. If there's one other like determining facet of his game, that man finds offense pretty much anywhere. He very rarely will just straight up concede a control position in order to like land a hammer fist, but if he's got you against the fence, he's going to start punching. If he's, got your back and even standing, like, oh, if you're going to give me a position where I can launch some stuff at you, I'm going to. Oh, I'm in, your full guard. Okay. If I'm not worried about an arm bar or a triangle choke or whatnot, I'm going to start hitting you. And finding offense is a major component of his success. And he's determined. That guy is not easily deterred by almost anything. So he's durable, physically very strong, builds his game around his physical attributes. Yeah, he looks funny when he does some of his stuff. It's not how I would teach anyone. Almost any of it, for being honest. But the more you care about the aesthetics and the less you care, there's got to be a variation on, there's a famous Napoleon quote. That is that quantity has a quality all its own, because there's always that argument, like, would you rather have quantity or quality, especially in military, Napoleonic era military in particular. There was that kind of discussion, like, would you rather have more troops or fewer troops but have them be a lot better? And that's an open question in a lot of respects. I'm sure everyone has an opinion, but one of the things Napoleon mentioned was, there is in fact a unique quality that quantity provides you. And there's got to be a variation of that quote that speaks to kind of a who cares how it looks if it works. And I know there's a little bit of, well, if something is stupid but it's working, it's not really stupid. But that's not quite. That applies to a lot of things. Not so much necessarily the specifics here. There has to be I don't know if any of you know, because somebody from like ancient Greece or a Chinese philosopher, somebody like some samurai from Japan or something, like somebody somewhere has thought about this and phrased it properly, that the value of how good something looks is not equal to its efficacy. Efficacy is everything in a fight. Does it land? Does it work? Yes? Then who cares what it looks like? In theory, good technique looks good and works. But if you tell me I can do something that looks good or I can do something that works and looks bad, I will take what works every single time. Now, the best make it look good and it works. And that's kind of where we derive that value from. But realistically, some fighters with very ugly technique in a lot of respects have been very, very successful because they know how to make it work. I mean, there's a few famous examples. Josh Barnett's a very ugly looking fighter in terms of his technique most of the time. Had a lot of success. Rocky Marciano. Which one was it? I can't remember if it was the first or second time that he fought Ezard Charles. I think it was the first. He was losing that fight on the cards, which was not unusual for Rocky. But he throws a right hand out of position. And Ezard Charles is such a consummate boxer that Well, look at where we are relative to each other. I forget the specifics of it. You can look it up. There's no way you'd throw that punch all the way across both of our bodies. It's stupid. It's not like, no. Charles, consummate technician. Ezra Charles, one of the greats. There's a reason James Toney studied that man as his primary like film study thing when he was coming up. Just wonderful boxer. And you shouldn't throw that punch from that spot. And Marciano does, and it lands, and it knocks him out. There's value to that. That's kind of what du Plessis has. Not comparing him to Rocky Marciano in any sort of like one-to-one thing, but because there's a lot of guys in the same vein. What I do isn't always pretty, but understanding the value of breaking the established rules in favor of reminding everyone that this is a fight and there's violence at stake has a lot of value. Helps that MMA is the way it's played out, man. It's a little bit weird. Because I remember when nobody had defense. We all lamented it. Then everybody got defense. And it was impressive. But something that came out of that, in particular, the way certain fighters, not only like, some of this was the incentive structure of the UFC being a little bit pissy about it, the UFC brass in particular, but even the scoring criteria, MMA primarily rewards offense in a way that other combat sports, it's a little bit dicier, believe it or not. I mean, boxing affirmatively values defense. MMA doesn't. Well, at least unified rules of MMA doesn't. Other rule sets, it's a little bit more different, but I mean, Muay Thai actually, a little bit depends on which scoring criteria you're using. Muay Thai scores the different weapons differently. So, again, that's kind of a thing there. Because of the point structure in wrestling, believe it or not, defensive counter wrestling is a very rewarding style. Instead of just all offense all the time looking to counter. So defense, counter, score points. That's a gross oversimplification, but bear with me here. MMA, first and foremost, rewards at pretty much every level of the incentive structure offense. Doesn't have to be in the same place. If you're an offensive submission threat, then hey, Godspeed, man. You can do work with that. You absolutely can. But your defensive jiu-jitsu isn't going to help you a whole lot. It won't help you win. It might help you not get finished, but it won't necessarily help you win. And du Plessis finds offense. He pushes a pretty decent pace, too, for guys their size. He kind of just wears you down. A lot of people. He thuds you up, makes you react, can switch up levels depending on, to put you in a bad spot, and just kind of wears you down. Because that's the other thing. I mentioned he was determined. Like, the guy doesn't go away. You know, Sean Strickland landed a fair bit on him. Didn't bother him. He kept coming. Darren Till put him on the back. Weird that I'm citing Darren Till, but go with me for just a sec. Darren Till put him under a lot of pressure at different points in their fight for as long as it lasted, and he just handled it. You know, not always ideally, but effectively. Derek Brunson put him in some slightly compromising positions when they went at it. He didn't go away, kept on grinding, pushed through, eventually stopped Brunson. That plays a part, man. Somebody that's just always there and always dangerous. This is kind of the other thing about MMA. Guys and girls, but fighters who are consistent threats to end the fight are they're a little bit rare. They're a perpetually unique problem to deal with, and frequently get celebrated. Um, I mean, for example, like Shavkat Rakhmonov finished all of his wins, undefeated. Du Plessis in a not exactly identical, but in a because he's got a few fights that went the distance, but in general, giving fighters like that a full 25 minutes to be in the fight, you just have to be on. I mean, Francis Ngannou kind of the same way. Navigating a full fight with that guy, what a Herculean task. Not impossible, but incredibly difficult. Du Plessis is just always willing to be in your face, always willing to try and hurt you. And it takes a lot of effort to deter him. And that's just really, really hard to deal with. Um, so I'm probably going to do a more serious tape study on Du Plessis, and I might do a separate, release that is just some of my findings from that if anyone's interested. But if not, whatever. I'd do it for my own edification. Post-fight, it was nice to see these two bury the hatchet. This got heated. I didn't talk about it a whole lot last week because I don't care about the drama. I don't care about what things people say to each other at press conferences. Plenty of other places you can go to hear that dissected. I don't care, and I think most of it doesn't matter. But this definitely got heated. And at the end of it, when they, again, kind of buried that hatchet, was good. This, I know the fan base is not going to react the same way these two did because there was, oh man, how do I phrase this without sounding like a jackass? When Du Plessis brought up, you know, I'm the African champion because I still live here, I still train here, he's right. Now, that got taken to be, Francis Ngannou, Kamaru Usman, Israel Adesanya. They weren't, question. It got taken to him questioning their heritage, and he very clearly said, "No, they're African, but they don't live in Africa. Their belts never came to Africa. They visited. I'm going to be the first guy who's like operates out of here." So he was not the first African champion, but if you maybe phrase it this way, I think I heard Mixed Molly Whopper phrase it this way: who between Israel Adesanya and Dricus du Plessis is a better representative of African MMA? Well, that's du Plessis, and it's not hard to figure that out as he doesn't train there. Which I'm not begrudging him or anyone else, mind you. Go where you're best suited for this. But if the question is like, who's the better representative of the development and the state of MMA from that continent, and bear in mind Africa's enormous, so even limiting this to one guy representing the whole freaking continent is comically inept. But, who's the better representative of that? The guy who trains there is the pretty clear answer. But this, Izzy got his back up a little bit about this, and I'm not even saying he was wrong to do so. You're trying to sell a fight. I get it. But Du Plessis very craftily, I think, very clearly said this is not about race. This is about, where you live. And I still live here. I train here. The belt's coming here. And it kind of, and Izzy then addressing that without making it about race, a very fine needle to thread, and Izzy didn't. Izzy's the one who kind of made it about, colonization and the history thereof, and ugh, just what a waste of everyone's. I am not going to get into my thoughts on that, on colonization, and because boy, it is equally true that some really bad stuff was done by people colonizing other cultures. As is true, a lot of those places had horrific practices. And that's just, there's no good answer there in some respects. So I'm gonna leave that there. I'm gonna move on. Um, but it did get heated. I mean, something weird. Like somebody mentioned, you know, Duplessis not the best fighter in the world, but keeps beating people. I think someone said he's like simultaneously the best and worst fighter in the division. He's also the last two press conferences like reduced his opponents to like I think he did make Sean Strickland cry, or he got under his skin really, because Izzy when talking about like his emotional investment in doing this for his family and everything did actually like get moved to tears at the pre-fight presser, partially spurred on by something DDP said. Like he's not the best trash talker in the world, but somehow what he says just really knifes people in the heart. But anyway, watching them, bury the hatchet after all the heat there. They had a great moment backstage. DDP gifted a jacket to Adesanya. He actually apologized to Izzy's parents and said, I didn't mean to question, your heritage or anything. I know where you're from, and thank you for raising a warrior like Adesanya. Moments like that, the stuff backstage, people need to take to heart much more than anything that's said at a conference or tweeted about to hype up a fight. I mean, this one, I think maybe the high watermark for that is still Tyron Woodley's mother, like hugging Kamaru Usman after Usman beat Tyron for the belt. Because he's clearly, emotional about the whole thing, and she finds him backstage. She's walking back and just hugs him and says, "No, it's your time now. He had his time. He was great. He won the fight fair and square. You go do thing now. It's your time." And genuinely heartwarming stuff. There's not enough of that I think gets enough play in the MMA media space. And they doesn't even have to be heated fights. I mean, there's another funny one. Oh, when Dustin Poirier beat Max in their lightweight fight, he found Rush, Max's son, in the back and said, hey, your dad's the best. He's keep your chin up. And again, stuff like that I think needs more play, because if all you care about is the BS that people say to hype a fight, everything gets really disgusting and toxic really, really fast, and I don't like that. As for what's next, well, there's a few things we have to see shake out, aren't there? Couple of things. So first, Alex Pereira said he might want to come back down to 185 and try to become a double champ. I don't know that the UFC is interested in that. I'm not very interested in that. I'm not interested in seeing Pereira back at 185. I actually, in all honesty, look, I'm not saying he couldn't win that fight, but at middleweight, I don't really like his chances against Duplessis. He could win, because Pereira's very, very good. But look at some of his grappling issues and tell me that that's not going to go bad for him. Sean Strickland and Duplessis rematch potentially in the works. The UFC seems to be interested in that. Their first fight wasn't exactly a barn burner, but it was super close, and Strickland did get a win since then. There's the fight between Robert Whittaker and Khamzat Chimaev that we need to see how that plays out. Because if one of the... Whittaker's a bit tougher because du Plessis already finished him. But you could do that rematch. That rematch would probably look nothing like their first fight, even if du Plessis wins again. And then you've got Chimaev, which is giant question mark. So, few things at middleweight we're waiting to see sort out, but man, du Plessis has not lost at middleweight since 2014. And because his style is awkward, people are overlooking this guy finished Robert Whittaker cleanly, no controversy there. Beat Sean Strickland, super close fight. Could have gone either way. Ultimately, he got the win. And then finished Israel Adesanya. First guy to submit him. That 3-fight stretch alone is huge. We need to get over the fact that some of this stuff looks weird. Because that guy just beat the two defining talents of the last generation of this division. He's done that. And the other guy who kind of disrupted things in Sean Strickland. Like, du Plessis is really good. He may not look it. I may not understand the ins and outs of his game very well. But you do not fluke your way into what he has accomplished. You just don't. And if you think it's lucky, first of all, there's always an element of luck. But if you think there's nothing but luck at play in his success, you are just sadly mistaken. I don't know what's next for Adesanya. He might stick around middleweight, but I don't know why. Like, that man is already the second best middleweight ever. The only guy ahead of him is Anderson Silva. And Anderson Silva is like maybe the best ever. You could put that guy at the top of your list of who's the greatest MMA fighters of all time. You put Silva at the top of that list, nobody's really going to argue with you. They might advocate for a different position, but the number of people who go up and say you are flat out wrong, that is indefensible, is non-existent. If that's the only guy in front of you, and by the way, you did beat him when you fought, I don't know what they're... I would be curious to see him make a serious push at 205. He's still got history with Pereira. He'd have to win a fight, but, 205 is a wasteland. I'm going to talk about it later, but, we know who Pereira's next opponent is, and it's not a top 5 contender. That's how bad that weight class is. That weight class has been bad for a long time. And they elevate. Imagine what that weight class looks like right now if Pereira isn't there. I mean this in all sincerity. What a wasteland that division is. You go up there, if Izzy goes up there and beats one guy who's ranked, don't really care who, one of them, you could easily do the third MMA fight between Pereira and Adesanya, now at light heavyweight, for the 205 belt. That is incredibly on the table. What he wants to do, I don't know. We'll see. He's only 35, but Izzy's been fighting for a long time across a lot of different sports. So, he said he's not going anywhere. I don't expect him to announce his retirement anytime soon, but he's definitely, I think, reached the phase of his career where somewhere in his head he knows, okay, the peak is back there. I'm still good, and he's still there were some people doing the Izzy was washed after this. that is just disrespectful to both fighters. Is he's not washed. Oh, he's not the best version of himself anymore. He's 35. Of course he's not. But to say that he's washed up, no. That term gets thrown around way too much in MMA. Way too much. He's not washed up. He's just not prime. There's a world of difference between not my best and washed. Huge world of... There's a lot of space there. He's just in that space. And he's still closer to prime than washed, is my read on things for the record. So, curious to see what he does next. And that was an hour on the main event. Sorry about this, guys. We're probably going long. You already know whether or not I do. I'll try to go faster through the rest of these, but... That main event, man, that was interesting. I've always had a soft spot for the awkward guys who make their style work. I had a big soft spot for Keith Jardine, believe it or not, when he was fighting. I was the only guy I knew who was like rooting for him to beat Chuck Liddell. Which is the darndest thing in the world to say out loud, but I kind of was. I've got a soft spot for those guys. He's not the only one, but that should give you, man, it occurs to me just now, there might be people listening to this who have no idea who Keith Jardine was as a fighter. He's a stuntman in Hollywood now, stunt coordinator. He actually got a feature film that he's directing a little bit now. So, yeah, I mean, first of all, good for him. I'm so happy that guy, found his life after fighting. He's actually in the second season of Punisher briefly. He's done a lot of stunt work, and he's directing some things. Stuntmen and stunt coordinators make very good directors, it turns out. Who'd have thought? But anyway, I had a soft spot for that guy. Just awkward, a little bit but made it work and had a lot of success. And so I've got a soft spot for Du Plessis in the same vein. And his game is, to me, interesting because I need to figure out how and why it works. I really do. Without being dismissive of, anyone who's fighting. All right, co-main event. Kai Kara-France defeats Steve Erceg via TKO punches, 4:04 of the first round. Interesting stuff here. Kai Kara-France doing a lot of blitzing. In fact, it's a blitz that basically ends this. A couple of minor variations on it, but it's a lot of just step through right hand, follow with the overhand left. I think the one that caught Erceg ultimately, he also included a second step through. So he's fighting orthodox. I think he was fighting orthodox. He might have been southpaw. I'll have to double check that, but it was like step through right, then step through left. And because it was a step through instead of just a swinging overhand, that time the distance was a little bit different. And he caught Erceg with it. I actually liked a lot of Erceg's pressure in this fight. He didn't get a bunch of his offense going, some, but just unfortunately backed straight up when trying to avoid the blitz. And if you're avoiding somebody blitzing, backing straight up is a bad idea. Got to angle, got to pivot. So just got caught. Came back might have come back a little too soon from that fight with Pantoja, which was pretty grueling. Kai Kara-France probably gets a title shot off of this, and given that Pantoja has now crossed the 35-year-old threshold, I do tend to think that whoever fights Pantoja next has a very good shot at beating him. That cutoff line, 155 and below of 35, is just brutal. It's just... It is a merciless truth that your skills will diminish and somebody will come up. And that comes up faster at the smaller weight classes. So, good win for Kai Kara-France. Dan Hooker defeats Mateusz Gamrot via split decision, 29-28. This was your fight of the night. Deserved it. Heck of a fight. Dan Hooker, man. That dude has been part of some absolute wars. His fight with Paul Felder, his fight with Dustin Poirier. Um, he took a brutal beating back when he was at featherweight when he fought Edson Barboza. That was almost hard to watch. And I'm not squeamish. Um, what was the other really tough one? I mean, Chandler stopped him, but that wasn't. Makhachev kind of got through him pretty quickly. That loss to Arnold Allen when he cut back down to featherweight, that was poorly conceived. But yeah, his knockout at Jim Miller was good. He had a tough fight with Yair Rodriguez. So, man, Dan Hooker's been in the UFC since 2014. Started at featherweight. I'm just going to read the people he's fought, win, lose, or draw. Oh, man, his knockout of Ross Pearson, though. That knee, oh, buddy, that's an all-timer. Look that up if you haven't seen it recently or at all. But his UFC career, these are just the guys he fought. Again, win, lose, or draw. Ian Entwistle, Maximo Blanco, Hatsu Hioki, Yair Rodriguez, Mark Adiva, Jason Knight, Ross Pearson, Mark Chikese, Jim Miller, Gilbert Burns, Edson Barboza, James Vick, Ali Quinta, Paul Felder, Dustin Poirier, Michael Chandler, Nasrat Haqparast, Islam Makhachev, Arnold Allen, Claudio Pugliese, Jalen Turner, and Mateusz Gamrot. That man has been in the trenches. Got a split decision here. I think I scored this for Gamrot personally, but I'm not mad about this one. Great fight. Hooker's an animal. And I mean that as a compliment. That guy just in the fight all the time, never going to give up. You have to kill that man. And people have. People have done the work necessary to put him down, but that's what you've got to do. His next fight, Dude, him and Justin Gaethje, how have we not seen that yet? Put those two maniacs in the cage together, let them kill each other's brain cells. Yes, please. Dan Hooker's career resurgence after that rough stretch, seriously inspiring. Inspiring stuff. Give me him and Gaethje and all of that. Yes, please. Gamrot, tough loss. Again, could have argued it for him. I don't think he's going to drop too much, but a win here would have put him in position to maybe make an argument for fighting for the belt. That he's going to have to rebound from, but again, fight of the night. Probably going to go on my list of fight of the year. Don't know where it'll end up ultimately, but good fight. Really good fight. Look this one up if you haven't seen it. Heavyweight, Jairzinho Rozenstruik defeats Tai Tuivasa via split decision. I can't. I just can't. There's a 30-27 for Rozenstruik. That's what I had. A 29-28 for Rozenstruik. And in fairness to that 29-28, I don't agree. But I don't think I can understand how you could be confused enough to give Tuivasa the third. Rozenstruik's offense in the third is not quite as effective. There's a lot more forward pressure from Tuivasa, and Rozenstruik seems content to not get knocked out. He diminishes his offensive output a little bit in order to play it a little bit safer. I still thought he won the round. But if you squint real hard, I can understand that one. Then there's a 30-27 for Tai Tuivasa, and I'm sorry, no. That is, the judge in question is like Howie Boone, who was immediately relieved of his duties. He was supposed to score the co-main event. They immediately got that guy and gave him the bum rush out the door, I would assume. Apparently, somebody who keeps track of this stuff, I think, cited the MMA decisions thing, because they will keep track of judges with high degrees of being the dissenting scorecard in the split decision. Of all the guys who have ever scored UFC fights, Nobody has been the dissenting opinion in a split decision more than this judge. 30-27 for Tai Tuivasa is the worst scorecard I've seen in the UFC. I've seen ones that I have railed against. I mean, I was up on my soapbox about that draw between Shevchenko and Grasso in their second fight because that 10-8 for Grasso in the fifth round to make it a draw was just utter horseshit. Sorry for swearing. Utter terrible. That terrible. This giving Tai Tuivasa all 3 rounds is one of the worst. That's the worst scorecard I've ever seen in the UFC. That might be what is. I gotta look this up real fast. See, if you ask about like the worst decision of all time, there's a few that constantly get brought up. Some of them somewhat unfairly. Who was that guy? Again, there's a few that get brought up. Sometimes a little bit unfairly, sometimes, but one of the worst ones I've ever seen. This is not a UFC fight. But there was a fight, Eastern Coast regional scene between Mike Easton and Chase Beebe, where Chase Beebe had back control for basically the whole fight, and Easton got the decision. Split decision. Terrible. One of the worst decisions you'll ever see. I don't know that I would consider some of the scoring of that fight to be worse than giving Tai Tuivasa all 3 of these rounds. And the fact that somewhere in my head, that might be, if that's the company you're keeping, I don't know what to say about this. I could get, again, really heated about it, but you just, you suck at your job. What are you watching? I mean, John Anik had the best line about this when he said, I don't know if did he just like go have a bathroom break during the whole second round? You'd think at least the second round. Because, again, all 3, for me, Rosenstruik. You want to squint really hard and go the third for Tuivasa. I'm going to disagree with you pretty firmly, but I can sort of in a drunken way understand where you're coming from. The other 2, no. That scorecard, that is the single worst scorecard I've seen in the UFC. It is incomprehensibly bad. That's not just a bad scorecard. It is the literal opposite of reality. You weren't just bad at your job, right? You deliberately went opposite, contrary, flew in the face of everything else. That's like malicious incompetence. Even a terrible judge should not have given all 3 rounds of this fight to Tai Tuivasa. I don't know what that guy was drinking. He was relieved of his duties for the night. He should be fired. He should never be allowed to judge again. If you can't get this right, this is not high-level MMA. This was not a good fight. If you can't get this right, you can't get anything right. You cannot be trusted to get anything right. You should not be judging MMA at all, ever, period. Terrible fight. Not a good fight. Tai Tuivasa should probably try bare knuckle. This is not working. And kicking off the main card. Ooh, buddy. Carlos Prates knocked out Li Jingliang 4:02 of the second. I became a big believer in Prates after what he did to Charles Radke. Because that knee he's hit to the body, it's rare you see someone get hit to the body and instantly fold up like a lawn chair. Normally it takes a second, especially a liver shot. Pratos, that knee, instantly. Instantly. Oh, thing of beauty. Um, had a good UFC debut, too. He looked phenomenal in this fight. Lots of forward pressure, good front kicks, had a good jab going a lot of the time. Easily avoided a lot of what Lee was throwing. Laser left hand, sits Lee down a couple of times in the first round. I think he was only credited with one knockdown, but I personally give him more. Second round, more of the same. Drops him again. Again, laser-like left hand. Lee gets up, tries to throw back as he's game. Pushes him back to the fence, hits a couple of left hands, then a right, then a smoking left hook. Right around the guard, right on the jaw, face plants Li Jingliang. That dude is a problem at welterweight. I think he's the one who, after the fight, said he wanted one more easy fight before the before moving up to like ranked competition, and I think he mentioned Chaos Williams. I don't know. I didn't hear him very clearly, but given that Chaos Williams is the one who responded to him on Twitter or X, I'm going to assume. Yeah, Carlos Prates is the real deal. If you're not already on that bandwagon, jump on. Seriously. I'm not saying champion, okay, because welterweight's tough. But that dude is going to end a lot of people. He's going to do some stuff. This was a big-time performance from him. On the back of a really good performance before, and then again, even his debut. Did he win that via like a flying knee? I might be misremembering. Find out real fast. No, it was Giles. Who am I miss? Oh, no, I know who I'm confusing him with as far as that the flying knee finish. Okay. No, he knocked out Trevin Giles in the second round. 3 wins, 3 escalations in competition, 3 finishes before we even hit the third round. Is this guy ever? Let me get away from a couple of things here. So if we look at just MMA, his last time going the distance was in 2019. And there's a few of these fights that don't indicate method or time, so. But dynamic finisher, dangerous guy, big, long for the weight class, accurate, powerful. Enjoy his rise. I don't know how high that's going to go, but enjoy that rise because the best time to enjoy a fighter is when they're on the come up. So get on that bandwagon if you like. He's doing stuff. So really good performance out of him. So that was your main card. Tuivasa and Rosenstruck sucked, but the rest of it was good. On the prelims, I'll go as fast as I can through these. Walter Walker defeated Junior Tafa via heel hook, 4:56 of the first. Caused some controversy. So the fight, I don't remember how I was scoring it to that point. A little bit in favor of Tafa, maybe. He landed a couple of punches, but he got taken down. Walter didn't do a whole lot on top, but he did get him down. Held him there, landed a few punches, then eventually, Tafa would kind of wall walk, but couldn't quite get away. Ultimately, in the waning seconds of the first round, Tafa's kind of working to get up from underneath, and Walker, sensing he might be losing the position maybe, or just figuring, screw it, we're short on time, drops back for a heel hook. This is normally inadvisable, but he goes for it. They start rolling on the ground, and at some point, you hear Justin Tafa yell out. And that constitutes a verbal submission. Referee jumps in and stops things, and Tafa immediately gets pissed. Really pissed. Goes over and, kind of slaps Walker. Just really unhappy about things. And here's the deal, guys, because the broadcast didn't know the rules, which is a bad look for everyone involved. It's in the rules, literally in the rules. A yell of pain can constitute a verbal submission. There's this notion that a verbal submission has to be saying tap. No. Yelling out in pain constitutes a verbal submission. We're done. You can't do it. This isn't pro wrestling where you're selling the thing and it only counts if you tap out. No, if you yell out in pain, especially with certain joint locks, they're going to stop it. This is in the rules. It's always been in the rules. This is not a rule that has changed pretty much ever. And there's apparently confusion about this because the broadcast wasn't sure what was going on. Different Twitter spaces had different meltdowns over it. No, guys, this is not complicated. If you're in a submission, you can't yell out in pain unless they will stop it, as they should. Don't do it. He did. You got stopped. There's apparently some bad blood between, because Walter Walker is the brother of Johnny Walker, and apparently part of what was going on here was Junior here was insulting Johnny Walker, and Walter got pissed about it. Then after this one, Walter called out Justin Tafa. Sure, let's get a blood feud going. Who doesn't love the Hatfields and McCoys, right? Get famous for killing each other. Featherweight, Ricardo Ramos defeats Josh Culibao via split decision, 29-28. Culibao should have won this, and I don't mean the decision should have gone his way. The decision going to Ramos is fine. Culibao does okay in the first round, then gets taken down, gives up his back, and Ramos does enough from the back and has it for long enough to win the round. No issues there. Second round, Culibao is landing some good calf kicks. He drops Ramos at one point, and then very poor decision making, I think is a fair way to say this. Very poor decision making. Doesn't really go down looking to finish him on the ground after hurting him badly with calf kicks. Stands over him and fires a few more kicks and spends time just futzing around, walking around the guard. Occasionally he would get around the legs and then throw a hammer fist followed by a downward punch, which looked nice but didn't really land all that cleanly, and just gave Ramos more than enough time to recover. Very poor decision making. Very poor decision making. Wins the second round. Third round is, again, doing okay, but the striking is a little bit more even, and then Ramos gets him down, gets his back for the last, minute and a half of the round. Enough to win it. Culibao has ability, but, man, his moment-to-moment decision-making, his fight IQ needs work. I actually thought I'd picked Culibao when I was covering that, and then I went up to my spreadsheet, and it said, no, you picked Ramos. I was like, oh. Past me knew something, I guess. Women's flyweight, Casey O'Neill defeated Luana Santos via unanimous decision. 2 30-27s and a 30-26. Don't know where you get 10-8 here. I don't know where you get that. Solid win for O'Neill. Nothing really stuck out here. Jack Jenkins, who I've been on his bandwagon for a little bit, defeats Herbert Burns via TKO. It's listed as retirement. Retirement means you give up. Basically is how this works in MMA. So he got hurt at 48 seconds of the third round. If you don't get up when the referee says get up and the referee waves it, that's when they get to retirement. And that's what happened here. or the corner stops it. Like that can occasionally be listed the same way. Um, Jack Jenkins looked real good. He's got nasty calf kicks, good pocket boxing, inside fighting. Tor burns up to the body, good about throwing knees. Jack Jenkins is just really good. He had that loss in the UFC to Chepe Mariscal when his arm got injured on a takedown. He was giving Chepe some problems though, and Chepe's tough as a nail, so I'm gonna tell you a lot about Jenkins. I've I like what he does when he fights, man. Um, this was his return fight from that injury, so good to see him back. Good to see him healthy. Um, he pretty much beat the crap out of Herbert Burns here, not Gilbert. Herbert Burns start to finish. Herbert probably shouldn't be doing this anymore. Just throwing that out there. Real good win for Jenkins, though. Pay attention to that guy. Another guy, definitely a rising prospect. On the early prelims, Tom Nolan defeated Alex Reyes. I didn't talk about this when we were talking about Izzy a little bit, but he did a lot of fence grabbing in that fight with du Plessis. Didn't get called on almost any of it. Reyes in this fight at one point knees Tom Nolan in the head when he's very clearly downed. Nothing happens about it. Rules in MMA are at best suggestions. Nothing is done about the actual enforcement of them. Tom Nolan gets a win, 230-27 to 29-28. Good enough performance from him. He's one of those guys who got to the UFC because he was steamrolling the level of opposition he did have. And he's struggling a little bit now that he's not just running people over. He got a win here. I'm not knocking him for it, but I've seen a lot of regional guys who are just definitively better than the regional scene, but struggle when they take that step up. That's a real thing. That gap is real, and a lot of guys struggle with that a little bit. Nolan, adjusting. It's still a process with him. He's adjusting. He was a giant favorite in this fight, and it did. By the time it was over, he did not look like he was like a minus 1200 favorite. Bit much. Didn't look like the gap was that big when this was all said and done, because I don't think it was that big. He got a win, but adjusting to the UFC level of competition, even the lower level UFC level of competition, is a real thing. He's still in that process. I still think he'll do it. I'm not trying to dump on the guy here. But as a general observation, some guys, when they come over with hype, if they haven't really been tested, they start struggling a little bit. He's in an adjustment phase. Song Kanan defeated Ricky Glenn via unanimous decision. 30-27, 30-26, and 29-28. Once again, not sure where the 10-8 comes from. Ricky Glenn just gets hit a bit too much, and Song was happy to hit him. Then kicking off the main card, Jesus Aguilar missed weight, but did catch a guillotine choke, jumped the gilly on Stuart Nickel, 2:39 of the first round, and put him to sleep. Some really fun grappling for as long as this lasted. Nickel, Aguilar came out a little bit hot. Got the back briefly standing. Nickel hit a really sweet Kimura roll into a back take. I get really sweet stuff there. Looked like the better grappler. Aguilar had to fight his way back up, but as he fought his way up, Nickel kind of just left his head out there a little bit, and Aguilar jumped guillotine and was able to get it. I had to adjust it a couple of times, but heck of a win. Heck of a win for him. Nickel, I liked what I saw out of him for as long as this lasted, so probably will do okay in his next fight, but not great to, lose your UFC debut like that. And that was it. That was the main card. That was the whole card, start to finish. All in all, pretty good. I was optimistic about this on paper. Mostly played out in practice. A few things. Du Plessis and Adesanya, worth a watch if you didn't see it. It's not an all-timer, but it's a good fight. Hooker and Gamrot absolutely look up. That was a good fight. Watch Prates beat up Li Jingliang, not because I dislike the Leech. On the contrary, I like him quite a bit. But boy, that's the kind of performance you want to watch. That's probably it as far as like wholehearted recommendations. Bonuses, fight of the night. Already mentioned Dan Hooker and Gamrot. Yes, please. No problem there. Performances went to Kai Kara France and Carlos Prates. You were kind of spoiled for choice. Well, spoiled for choice might be a bit of a stretch, but you could have gone performances a few different ways. You weren't going to go Aguilar because he missed weight. You could have easily gone Jenkins for the totality of his performance in that fight because he beat Herbert Burns until Burns just wouldn't get up. You could have gone there, and you could have gone du Plessis. I don't think that would have been out of line. That said, Kara France and Prates, I'm not complaining about those calls one way or the other. Prates in particular. Prates would have got it from me. He's the one lock. Given how that whole fight went, that was your lock for a post-fight bonus. Second one, Jenkins, Kara France, or du Plessis, any of them could have gotten that one. Not objecting to Kara France getting it. Yeah, that was the whole event. So my full report is in the MMA Zone of 411mania.com if you want to go read that. Always appreciate it. So thank you. Yeah, that took a while, but there was stuff to talk about there. So let's move on, shall we? And let's try to get through this faster. UFC on ESPN 62. Oh. Reset the spreadsheet. Because this card does not look great. Okay. Main event. I actually don't hate the main event. Jared Cannonier and Caio Borralho. This is a good fight. Caio Borralho has been on the rise for a little bit now. He's kind of the main force behind the Fighting Nerds. Dude, Borralho hasn't lost since his second professional fight. He's on, what, a 15-fight unbeaten streak? There's a draw. Not a draw, sorry, a no contest in there. But 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, 6-0 in the UFC. He's got some good wins, too. Omar Gadzhiev is not a pushover. Armin Petrosian was... Mahmoud Muradov, those were both good wins. Mikhail Oleksiejczuk. Albus Magomedov is, whatever, but then stops Paul Craig in the second round. He beat up Paul Craig pretty much that whole fight. This is his big step up because Jared Cannonier is, despite being 40, that dude's the real deal. He's coming off a stoppage loss to Nasruddin Imavov. He didn't love the stoppage. I understood it, but I also understand where he's coming from a little bit. But his only losses at middleweight prior to that were Whitaker and Adesanya. And oh no, the two guys who defined middleweight until very recently. Because he started his career at heavyweight, believe it or not, did Cannonier in the UFC. Lost to Sean Jordan, then had another fight at heavyweight, knocked out Cyril Asker, dropped to light heavyweight, beat Iwan Kutalaba, lost to Glover Teixeira. And did a little bit of work at light heavyweight, then lost back-to-back fights to Jan Blachowicz and Dominic Reyes, and finished his cut to middleweight, and has been very good there. Didn't think he won the Strickland fight. In fairness, I scored that for Strickland. But again, Sean Strickland, former champion. He's got some really good wins on his resume. This is a tough one. This is a good fight. 5 rounds for... This is a first for Borralho in terms of going 5 rounds, right? He's been scheduled for it once before. No, that was a 3-round title fight? Okay. Okay. Not gonna comment on that beyond, okay, it's a little bit odd, but whatever. So that's a bit of a question mark. But in general, I've been supremely impressed with Borralho's game. Good everywhere. Good takedowns, really good grappler, smart. Again, kind of one of the main minds behind the Fighting Nerds gym, which has really started coming on this last year as something to pay attention to. Let me bring up my other couple of things here. The odds on this one, have a quick look. Odds are okay with Bahalio, right around 2-1. It's like minus 200, give or take. That, I can understand that. I imagine that line will close before the fight happens. But I don't disagree with Bahalio as the pick. I'm agreeing with that one. I think Cannonier's better than like plus 170 related to him, but Bahalio is on the upswing, and this might be a bit too much for him at this particular moment in time. That's very possible. And Jared Cannonier can definitely take your head off. But I'm going with Bahalio. That is a worthy main event, though. The rest of this card, meh. But respect the main event. Respect to the main event. So co-main event, strawweight, Angela Hill and Tabitha Ricci. I do not care about this fight. Angela Hill's won her last couple of fights. She finally got a finish her last time out. She caught a guillotine choke on Luana Pinheiro. That was her first finish since like 2020. Yeah, that was her first submission win. Was that her first submission win ever? I believe so. So she's, there. If this were 5 rounds, I would pick Hill. Start there. Hill's gas tank is still kind of a question mark, but Ricci's been a bit up and down. Her only strawweight loss, actually, is a split decision to Lupe Godinez, where you could have scored that for her. Ricci's good on the ground, but she's not the best about takedowns. I don't know. Hill, respectfully, is 39. And almost 39 and a half. Actually, that's January, so no, she's actually over 39 and a half. I'm really going to pick Ricci. Odds on this one are also super close. I'm gonna go with Hill right now, but I'm gonna asterisk this one. I wanna think about that some more. Next up, welterweight Neil Magny and Michael Morales. Neil Magny, dude, just still plugging away. Coming off a win over Mike Malott, he was losing that fight badly, and then Malott kind of fell apart in the end of the third round. Even like Malott was winning most of the third round. What a almost historic collapse there from Malott, really. Respect to Neil Magny, man. Like, dude's been in the UFC since 2013. He came into the UFC with 8 professional fights and has just been there since. 38 fights in the UFC. So, respect to that. He's fighting a younger, up-and-coming guy, Michael Morales. Morales has looked okay thus far. Knocked out Trevin Giles, beat Adam Fuji. He's taken a step up here. Morales' win over Jake Matthews, actually November of last year, so he's been out for a bit. But that was a fairly impressive performance. Have a quick other look at Morales. He's 16-0. This feels a little bit like too much. Like, Magny's just a really tough roadblock. And There's that fight there and not here. Sorry, I might have to... Let me check something real fast. Let's go to Mearshart, Silva Bazooka, Huh. That is not listed here either. I'm going to assume it has fallen off or is just kind of erroneously placed on the Tapology website. Okay. Sorry. Moving on. Feels a little bit like this is a step up for Morales. Neil Magny is the kind of guy who's made a career out of turning back fighters like Morales, which is fine as a thing until it stops working, and it's going to stop working at some point. Morales is a big favorite. Jeez, has Magny really faded that much? Malott did a number on him, and if Malott had slightly better decision making at the end of that fight, he would have won. I mean, okay, I'm gonna phrase it like this: I don't think Michael Morales is a minus 700 favorite. I think that's a bit much, especially given the durability and general game of Neil Magny. Potentially paying out 5-1 on Neil Magny winning, that is asking for a lot of trouble. I am going to go with Morales. He's only 25, and Magny, I already mentioned, 37. And man, as much time as Magny's been in the UFC, that does just wear on you. So I'm gonna lean Morales here, but I do not believe that those odds I'm seeing are reflective of this fight. If you're just looking for value, getting plus 400 or so on Neil Magny. Again, don't gamble something you can't afford to lose. But if you are looking for value, I don't think those odds are accurate. Or an accurate representation of this fight. Just throwing that out there. Middleweight, Edmund Shabazian and Gerald Mearshart. Shabazian, that poor guy. Got the gimme of all gimmies, basically, in a rebound fight with AJ Dobson, but he's 2-4 in his last 6. His losses over that time period, in fairness, these are all good fighters. Derek Brunson, Jack Hermanson, Nasruddin Imavov, and Anthony Hernandez. But when your only wins are over Dalcha Lungiambula and AJ Dobson, and he's fighting Gerald Mearshart, Mearshart is not some, savant. But he's hard to beat. I kind of thought he beat Petrosky. Choked out Brian Barberena his last time out. He's slow, though, is Mearshart. And his takedowns aren't great. They're trying to give Shabazian another winnable fight. I don't feel bad about saying that. And the odds seem to reflect that. Mearshart can be hit. And there's a definite athleticism edge for Shabazian. I'm going to buck the trend, and I'm going to pick Mearshart. I just don't really pick Shabazian to win fights. That might come back to bite me here, but so be it. I think Shabazian will have some success, but if he can't put Mearshart away in the first round, I think Mearshart gets him down the stretch. Featherweights next. Danny Silva and Dennis Bazookia. Bazookia just coming off of that first UFC win. Yeah, for some reason the Tapology page still has Robert Valentin and Ryan Loder is happening here. And I don't see that fight listed on either the Wiki or the UFC's website. So I don't know what's up with that. If that fight does happen, I will make some kind of an educated pick. I don't think it's listed on the odds website either. Don't know what's up with that. Topology is normally very reliable, so. Anyway, Danny Silva, Dennis Bazookia. Down a little bit. Yes, Bazookia, 12-4. Again, 1-2 in the UFC. Beat Conor Matthews. Was doing okay in that fight before the finish. I think I had him up. Silva, 9-1. 3-fight winning streak. Missed weight for his UFC debut against Josh Kulabau, but won a split decision. Tough one here. Not a lot. Both guys a little bit unknown. Odds are with Silva. He has demonstrated, some of those struggles. I'll respect it. I'll go with Silva. But not a fight I would care to wager on. Next up, I believe we have Slava Claus. Nope, that's one fight further down, I guess. Zachary Reese and Jose Daniel Medina. Yeah, okay, so Medina, is he the first Bolivian to make his way to the UFC? He might be. I'd have to double check that, but if he is, I'm sure the UFC team will let us know. They're good about pointing out when we check off new countries. So Medina, 11-3. I believe this is no, he loses UFC debut. No, he lost on the Contender Series. Getting a fight here anyway. Okay. Yeah, the loss in the Contender Series was to Magomed Gaziasulov. Okay. And Reese, somewhat by contrast. Let's see, 7-1. He got slam knocked out in his UFC debut against Cody Brundage. Rebounded by knocking out Julian Marquez. That was actually in 20 seconds. That was impressive. It was a good win. Let me go with Reese here. I don't know enough about Medina to feel confident picking him. But I think you'd be foolish to completely discount him. Let me just put it like that. Then Vyacheslav Borshev and James Yontop, because we're trying to find Borshev fights he can win. Because for a guy who trains at Team Alpha Male, his takedown defense is just not very good. And his ability to get up from underneath is also just not very good. 7-4-1, 2-3-1 in the UFC, coming off a loss to Chase Hooper. He's got 2 UFC wins. One over Dakota Bush, who was no longer, I think that cut him from the UFC. And then Mahashate. Losses to Mark Chikadze, Mike Davis, a draw with Nazim Sadikov, and then the aforementioned loss to Chase Hooper. Yontop, Peruvian. Nickname is Goku. You know what? I respect it. A lot of Latin America loves Goku. And Dragon Ball in general. But you know what? Fair play. Who doesn't love? 14-3. Lost his UFC debut to Chris Padilla. I'm going to pick Borshev here. I am, but this might be the last time I pick that guy. Yeah. O-R. U-R-S-H-E-H-E-V. Okay. I don't expect great things out of Borshev. I don't dislike the guy, but at this point, I don't know. If he's not going to make a serious adjustment about his training, he's just going to keep struggling. Let's see. Then we have Giacolini Cavalcanti and Josiane Nunes. Nunes coming off a loss to Chelsea Chandler. I mean, Chandler missed weight, but still, that's kind of hilarious. She'd done okay in the UFC before that, beating Bea Malecki, Romana Pasquale, and Zara Pham. Cavalcanti, let me have a quick look here. 6-1. She's fighting out of Portugal. 4-fight winning streak. Won her UFC debut over the aforementioned Zara Pham. I feel like the odds are with Nunes, right? Odds are with Cavalcante. That's interesting. Let me go with that as well. Nunes again. She's got a few wins, but I don't know. I barely remember them. You know, again, not a fight I haven't put a great deal of thought into. And kicking everything off, we have Wang Kong and Victoria Leonardo. So Kong is the family name, so it would normally be presented as Kong Wang. But when you westernize it, Wang is the family name. Wait, so which of these is? Hang on, let me check that. No, the UFC is the one who's listed it the way she listed, so Wang is the family name. Tapology does the westernization of this, so this is Kong Wang. So yeah, Wang is the family name. Got a lot of Sanda stuff to her name. Pretty decent kickboxing record. Undefeated in MMA, 5-0. Got a win over Wu Yanan. Then a win on road to UFC thing. So this is her UFC debut. Leonardo, bit up and down in the UFC. Okay, a few of these are weird. She's 1-3 in the UFC. Lost to Manon Fior, maybe the next champion. Like, oh no, the horror. She had that doctor stoppage loss to Melissa Gatto. I believe that's the one where there was like a broken nose or a really bad or a cut on the bridge of the nose that got them to stop it, and that was I was okay with it personally, but I understood also the people who were a little bit dubious about it. Beat Mandy Bohm, most recently lost to Natalia Silva. Leonardo is better than her UFC record would indicate to you. I don't know that she's not being set up here. Wong's a pretty big favorite. So I know what they're, and I don't think that's unfair. Like, what the UFC is kind of angling for is pretty obvious. I'll respect that, and I'll go with Wong, but once again, I don't, like, she's like minus 850. That seems a bit much to me. All things considered, like, that's asking for some trouble too. No problem going with Wong, but I don't know that I would. There's a lot of people under these circumstances that I would feel all that comfortable putting that as that big a favorite. That's a bit dicey. But that is the fight card as it currently stands. So it's not great. If we're being honest, it is not a great card on paper. I will be covering it in the MMA Zone of 411mania.com though. So this Saturday, stop by, say hello. Y'all know the drill. I always appreciate it. All right. Let's go through this rapid fire. One of these should not take too long. All right. So I got a specific request from a friend of mine. to talk about this on the show tonight, so I will make the time for that. If you have a subject you'd like me to talk about that is at least moderately timely, feel free to reach out to me. If you know me personally, then via Facebook or something similar. If you don't, then the comment section, or you can find me on X/Twitter at WinFreeMMA. I take requests. A friend of mine, Andrew Graham, who has on occasion been on this show a while back, but on occasion, um, asked me to talk a little bit about something interesting, the UFC erasing Francis Ngannou. So this got cycled through again. Somebody started recirculating the screenshot from, and this is from a while back, and the event in question was it last year at some point, I want to say? But Tafan Chukwi is walking to the cage, and on the little graphic thing they have for him, part of the thing they had was only Cameroonian fighter in UFC history, or first. Which is not true on a variety of levels. One, Francis Ngannou. Cameroonian, was the champion, so they're trying to ignore him. Here's the other thing, though. Because they can't say, they don't want to leave it at second Cameroonian fighter in UFC history, trying to erase Francis, because the only other Cameroonian fighter most people know from the UFC is Francis Ngannou. Francis Ngannou was not the first Cameroonian to make his way to the UFC. The first was a gentleman responsible for one of the largest upsets in MMA history, a gentleman who went by the name of Sokaju. It was Remy Thierry. I can never remember how they pronounce that. Sokaju, who rose to prominence by one of the last Pride-adjacent events, if memory serves. He knocked out Little Nog when Little Nog was regarded as one of the better light heavyweights in the world. Sokaju, again, enormous underdog. One of the bigger up. If there's a couple of like fights you want to like potentially go back in time and bet on, but you don't want to like maybe skew the line too much because or anything like that, like Sokaju to knock out Little Nog, enormous payout. Just throwing it out there if you're a time traveler. Cut me a check, please. I'd appreciate it for the tip. Would appreciate that. He made it to the UFC. Didn't do a whole lot there, but first Cameroonian, Sokaju. But again, they can't just say Tafan Chukwi, second Cameroonian fighter in UFC history, because that's too close to acknowledging Francis Ngannou. So they erased two guys from their past, because the UFC is a terrible steward of their own history. And they got called out on it, rightly so, but that recirculated the last, week, 2 weeks. It coincided with a bit of censorship from the UFC. Bastions of free speech, those guys, right? During the 305 pre-fight press conference, Israel Adesanya brought up that, he felt Dricus du Plessis had disrespected the African champions, and he specifically named Francis Ngannou, Kamaru Usman, and myself. He's never going to be part of the three African kings or whatever, which was always a weird thing to try and attach to those guys, but that's a whole other story. I don't want to say it was purely gimmickry because that's disrespectful to the connection those gentlemen feel with their heritage, but it was all, and it clearly meant something to them, so, maybe I'm just talking out of my ass, but it did feel a little weird, if I'm being honest, but anyway, that doesn't matter. But he said specifically all three, specifically the other two by name. The official video that the UFC put out edited out his reference to his naming of Francis Ngannou. Straight up removed it. It's very, very weird that one, the UFC does like to style themselves as these, like, again, in the culture war, we're a bastion of free speech. You're not. You may not do a whole lot of policing of what fighters say in some respects, but the UFC is a very censorious organization. They are pro-censorship, and let me be clear about the following. It's their own product. If they wish to be so, they're allowed to be. Shouldn't say I don't actually care. I am not here trying to pillory them for having control over their own product. That doesn't strike me as unreasonable. When part of your identity is as the stewards of the sport, though, and you go out of your way to drive everyone else out of business, and then you try to erase history, I do have a problem with that. I do think that's dangerous. I don't like it when I really hate it when governments do it because governments get to enforce it with violence. I don't like it when corporations do it. I don't like it when other, even like unofficial groups get together and try to like downplay or ignore aspects of other combat sports history. Look, Israel Adesanya had a chance last night to become just the second guy to become a three-time weight class champion in the same weight class. Only one other guy's done that. Want to guess who? I mentioned him last week when I talked about the opportunity afforded to Adesanya here. It's Randy Couture. Randy Couture is a three-time heavyweight champion in the UFC. He's the only other guy that's been a three-time champion in one weight class. Now, Couture also was obviously a champion in light heavyweight, but there's never even been a two-time lightweight champion. Or flyweight for that matter. No, flyweight has. Sorry, my mistake. There's never been a three-time flyweight champion. Moreno might still pull that off. I don't think that's outside the realm of possibilities, for the record. But there's not for bantamweight. There's a couple of two-time champions at bantamweight. Not at featherweight. Aldo's a two-time champion. I think he's the only two-time champion for that weight class, though, because it was Aldo, Conor bailed, Aldo got it back. Max just had it until Volk beat him. Volk just had it until Topuria beat him. So Max is going to try to become a two-time champion in that weight class, which is also rare, but Max is also, trying to parse out Max's legacy relative to Aldo is a weird thing. Because by the time they fought, Max was the better fighter both times they fought, clearly. But I don't know that the Aldo disrespect in general is catastrophic in my mind. It's just, there's so many people who just don't know how good he was. Whole other thing. But go up the list if you like. Nobody's done it. The only other guy to do it three times in the same weight class was Randy Couture. There was going to be no mention of that last night, even if Adesanya won. Because the UFC doesn't like Randy Couture, so they pretend he doesn't exist. There's a great story, believe it or not, around... Rashad Evans has told it. And because it's about him. Before his fight with Chuck Liddell, he was starting to freak out. Like the day before the fight, 24 hours before that fight's supposed to happen, he's thinking about pulling out. Seriously thinking about it. And nobody can... His coaches can't quite get to him. They can't talk him down off the ledge, so to speak. So Randy was on slightly better terms with the UFC at that point. They send Randy Couture over there to talk with him. What's up? And Evans was he was undefeated at that point, was very worried about being knocked out. It was actually in his head about it because he's fighting Chuck Liddell. And Chuck he's coming off the win over Vanderlei Silva, if memory serves. So we're not really that far removed from Chuck Liddell, the Destroyer. When he had this stretch of 7 fights in a row at light heavyweight where he finished all the guys, it was something like that. Let me look this up. Actually, I don't want to just pull this from my memory, which is not always wholly reliable. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, it was 7. So this is he loses to Quentin Jackson in Pride, comes back to the UFC, stops Ortiz, stops Vernon White, stops Randy Couture, stops Jeremy Horn, stops Randy Couture again, stops Babalu Sobral, stops Tito Ortiz again, Then at that point, the only fight he'd lost that he hadn't avenged was the Jackson one. Early in his career, he got caught in an arm triangle from Jeremy Horn when he didn't quite know what he was doing. That's a weird fight too. That's very early. That's UFC 19. They have like a 12-minute round. It's weird. But he lost to Horn. He lost to Randy Couture in 2003. Then he goes over to Pride and loses to Rampage. Um, but so he wanted the win back over Quinton. He'd beaten everybody else that had beaten him. He'd stopped, again, 7 in a row. Rampage knocks him out in the first round. Then he drops a split decision to Keith Jardine. That should not have been split. Jardine won that fairly clearly to my mind. Then he rebounds okay. Good fight over Vanderlei Silva. That's a really good fight. So he's bounced back from the 2-fight losing streak. And being cognizant of the fact that that guy could knock you out cold doesn't seem unreasonable, but Rashad's not really in a headspace where, again, it's getting in his head about it. So Randy comes over and talks to him in his hotel room, and what's the big, what's going on? I'm worried about being knocked out, and Randy basically tells him it's not that big a deal. It's not great, but it doesn't hurt as much as you think, because getting knocked out is not actually as painful as other things. And if you do, you're going to wake up. And your family and your friends and your team are still going to be there. They're still going to love you, and they're still going to support you. And basically calms Rashad down. If you get knocked out, it's not the end of the world. Loosens Rashad up, and Rashad then famously knocks out Chuck Liddell. That's one of the funniest, I'd say funniest, but that was so not the result that anyone anticipated. Not that Rashad was incapable of winning that fight, but to knock him out like that, yeah. Look, Rampage started that whole decline when he knocked him out, but Chuck actually does okay in the Jardine fight. He won the first round, but to my mind, that was a pretty clear 29-28 for Jardine. But then still has a very good fight with Vanderlei Silva. It's this fight where Rashad just slumps him like a cutting the strings on the old marionette. Just boom, done. That's really when it's all done. We don't necessarily know it because he comes back, Chuck does, and he fights Shogun and he gets stopped. Fights Rich Franklin and he gets stopped. And then 8 years later he fights Tito Ortiz and gets stopped. And that's when it's really Rashad that's like the final blow that just solidifies that we're done. The extra fights were not necessary, but anyway, you don't hear that story. It's a great story. You're never going to hear it because it mentions Randy Couture. And the UFC at the moment is trying to erase Francis Ngannou. He's still the lineal heavyweight champ. So I mentioned this before. If you trace the lineal heavyweight title in MMA, it doesn't really get reunified with the actual physical belt until Francis beats Stipe. I want to say that's the case, or it wasn't until Stipe got it. Because it's a very weird belt to track, because it doesn't have a straight line. It actually goes with Randy Couture, and Randy Couture goes to rings, and then Randy loses, again, I want to say it was to Ensign Inoue. And it takes a really weird detour through Pride. I think Fedor had it at one point. And if Fedor had it, then he had it until Verdum beat him. But Verdum wound up losing to Overeem. I think after he had beaten Fedor, because then they have I think that's when they fought. And again, it's weird to track, but at the moment Ngannou has it. So if you track the lineal belt, who beat the man, it's still Francis Ngannou. And they're just trying to ignore him. The fact that they don't like you talking about him at all is really the telling element here. So the UFC becoming this censorious and this, like, it's not new. It's kind of been a thing for a while. It's just becoming a bit more apparent these days. All right, moving on. Let's talk about some news. So UFC 307, which will be in Salt Lake City, finally got a main event. Because there was no way they were going to main event with Pena and Pennington. Just no. But our main event is for the light heavyweight title. Alex Pereira defending against, drumroll please, Khalil Roundtree. If you're going, wait a minute, what? Yeah, you and a lot of people. I'm not here to try and knock Khalil Roundtree. All this dude did was accept a title fight. The UFC putting the number 8 contender, I think that's what he's ranked at, in there is just weird. It's bizarre. You had two more deserving guys in the form of both Magomed Ankalaev and Alexander Rakic, and you decided to match them up because the UFC doesn't like Ankalaev. And hasn't since he fought to that draw with Jan Blachowicz. Dana White coming out after the fact and going, you had that big wrestling advantage, you didn't do anything until late enough that all we got was a draw. And yeah, they're still pissy at the guy. But we're going all the way down to number 8. Like, once again, no shade on Roundtree. He's accepting a fight. That's all he's doing. And I don't blame him one iota. I look at the structural problem that this represents, though. Like, light heavyweight, I've already mentioned, like, that's a terrible division. You were going to the number 8 guy, and a part of the reason we're going to the number 8 guy is because you just don't like some of the other guys ranked above him. It's sad. Roundtree does have a bit of a history of beating glory kickboxers who've come to MMA, though, so... Look, do I think that fight's going to be probably okay? Probably. See which of these two guys is utterly unprepared for the elevation. That's going to be funny. Look, I don't know what it is. Salt Lake City is not the highest elevation location the UFC goes to, even on a somewhat regular basis. But everyone knows to prepare for the elevation in Denver, and Salt Lake City's not that much lower, but for some reason, you don't think about it that way. Don't know why, but people are just unprepared for it, more so than, oh no, it's so high. Like, UFC takes fights to Mexico City. That's significantly higher than Denver, even. And we're just like, yeah. But people know to prepare for it. And for some reason, they don't think about it with Salt Lake. I've talked about this before. It catches people off guard, so their preparation is not adequate when it comes time to actually fight. That whole card, they lost a fight. They were supposed to have Chris Curtis and Kevin Holland. Curtis, unfortunately, broke his foot. So we've got Roman Dolidze stepping in instead. That's really it's not a great card. So you got that main event, you got 2 title fights, but who cares about Pennington and Pena? Shouldn't that just kick off? Shouldn't that be our curtain jerker, really? Stephen Thompson, Joaquin Buckley is okay. Jose Aldo, weird one that they're bringing Aldo. One that Aldo is deciding to fight again for the UFC. Weirder that he's coming back to Salt Lake. I mean, he got a good reception here last time, but still. Bautista's a winnable fight for Aldo, who's still really good. So it's a little bit odd that of all the places you could have brought Jose Aldo, you're bringing him here. Just, again, a little bit odd. Aljamain Sterling and Movsar Evloev is actually an okay fight. I mentioned already, but Kayla Harrison versus Ketlin Vieira, that fight exists on this card so that they can bump Kayla Harrison to the title fight if something happens to Pennington or Pena. And I don't think it matters which of them it happens to. If something happens to Pennington, they will just take the belt away from her and make that fight for the vacant one. I have a very strong suspicion. Yeah, it's not a great card. It's okay. It's not great. But, that's our main event. Division in such a healthy spot, we're going to the number 8 contender. For the record, though, also, for the record, Roundtree is not... I'm not going to pick him, but you'd be foolish to think he's incapable of winning that fight. That's all I'm going to say about that. Minor news here. The UFC fighters were in the news for bad things. So there were a couple of fighter scuffles over the weekend. Marab Dwalishvili was in attendance at the Craig Jones Invitational. By the way, that was awesome. Both days of it are up for free on YouTube. Watch it if you like good grappling. Really good stuff there. Some really good stuff. So, thumbs up to the CJI, for the record. Not going to go into too much detail here, but thumbs up to it. I haven't gotten through all of it. I've seen a bunch of clips, so I know how things go, but I haven't. It's long. It's a long event, and I have had other stuff to do, so I'm going to start going through it soon. But everything that I have seen, continue going through it, not start. I haven't started the second day. I haven't finished the first day, but really good stuff. Marab Dwalish really was in attendance and went after a heckler because Marab is crazy. Maybe more prominently, after the PFL event over the weekend, at the casino where this was being held, Brendan Allen and Marvin Vittori got into a brawl. Stuff was said, and Brendan Allen just started throwing hands. So, that was a thing. Yeah, so a bit of that, if you care about that kind of stuff. Lastly here, I'm going to check the old social medias, see if anything crazy has happened, but last thing I have written down here, Dana White came out publicly and said Conor McGregor's not fighting in 2024, and Conor got pissy about that and said, hey, what about December? At which point we all kind of collectively went, hey, weren't you supposed to fight like 3 weeks ago? I find it very hard to believe that Conor just will never fight again for the UFC, but the circumstances under which he might ultimately do so at this point seem radically different than what was pitched to the public and what I think even the more cynical of us anticipated. And we're about to get the finale to the season of Tough that they filmed after Conor and Chandler. And bleh. It's Conor's existence at this point is just a headache for all of us paying attention. All right, that's everything I've got. 2.5 hours, so let me check the old X machine and see if anything crazy has happened in the MMA space. If not, we'll do plugs and get out of here. Alrighty, nope, nothing new there in the world of MMA, so we are on to plugs. What do I got this week? Monday, a review of Alien Romulus over on Damn You Hollywood. That should be a good time. So tune in for that if you want to hear me talk movies. Last week we reviewed Borderlands. Almost forgot. Wish I could forget now that it's been recalled. I wish to forget that movie again. Myself, Mark Radulich, and Jason Teasley all talked about Borderlands, a little bit about the games, the movie, which is not good. But listen to us review it if you're so inclined. Coverage this week will be WWE SmackDown on Friday, UFC on ESPN 62 on Saturday, and then I agreed to cover AEW's All Out or All In or whatever it's called. What are we up to? Upcoming events. All In. So that's their Wembley. I just couldn't remember if it was All In or All Out. All Out is in September. Okay. So I will be covering that on Sunday. That's going to start. That's an earlier start time there in England. And they're happy to not have their card go on at god-awful hours in the venue where it's happening. Yeah, 1 p.m. Eastern is the start time for that. So once again, head on over to the Wrestling Zone of 411mania.com for my coverage of that and yeah, the other stuff in their respective zones as well. And then we will be back here to review UFC on ESPN 62. We will not have a preview, right? Yeah, the next card after that, back in the Apex still, headlined by Gilbert Burns and Sean Brady. It's not a bad fight. That's not until September 7th, so August 31st, the UFC has nothing, and I will enjoy my week off. Don't know what I'll do with it, but I'll do something. What else is on that card? Um, hmm. You know, this is not going to jump off the page at a lot of people. There's some fights here I do not care about, but if I'm being honest, that one's better than the next week's. It's still not good. It's still warehouse fights, but it's better than ESPN 62. On paper, at least. Who knows? We'll see. All right, so that's what we have next week. All right. Thank you all very, very much for listening. I know it's a longer one, but I appreciate the heck out of you, so use the timestamps to skip around to stuff you care about. I will not hold that against you one iota. All right. That's it for me for this week. Thank you again. Stay safe out there and continue to be well, be safe, and behave.